I want to talk to you about something that almost nobody in real estate talks about because it's uncomfortable and because it doesn't fit neatly into a market update or neighborhood tour. I want to talk about what happens to two people who love each other, who've built a life together, who agree on almost everything but can't get on the same page about a move. And it's not because one of them is wrong, it's not because the timing isn't right, but because they've never actually had the conversation. The real one. Not shouldn't we look at listings, not what's the market like now. The one that goes underneath all of that. The one about this next chapter. What you're actually quietly afraid of and what you're actually quietly hoping for. And that conversation, in my experience, is one of that changes everything. And today, I want to have it with you. So you're not alone in this. First and foremost, I want you to know that this is where you are, and one of you more ready than the other, and both of you circling with the idea without ever quite landing. You're not in a broken relationship. You're in an extremely normal one. And I'm going to name myself in this whole deal because I went through the same issue. And I think this is important because I wasted time and probably money and probably opportunity for a better living situation. So I have this conversation in some version or another with almost every couple I work with. And what I've learned over the years of doing this is the gap between people is almost never about the move itself. It's about the move that represents each of them. And those things are not always the same. For one person, moving to a new space, right sizing, starting fresh, it kind of represents freedom. It's exciting, right? And the XL after the decades of accumulating, and I'm talking about couples that are maybe 50 plus, 60 plus, the space to become is the next version of themselves. So for the other person, it may represent a loss. The home, it's a home where the kids grew up and the kids had friends coming over, the neighbors, everybody, you know who the neighbors are, the whole story, the version of yourself, and that's all tied to that specific address. And we always remember the address that we grew up in. Most of us do. I do. But both of those things are real because both of them deserve to be in the room. And the problem is, and I'll say this with some great compassion, most couples never put them both in a room at the same time. One person is pushing forward and the other is quietly grieving, but don't say so out loud. And because neither of them wants to cause pain, neither of them will, approach the subject, quite frankly. So it just kind of sits there. It's like invisible. It's like a ghost. And it turns into friction. And it feels like it's disagreement about square footage or, probably not school districts because the kids are grown, whether the market is right, whether the interest rates are right, when really it's something more fundamental. It's two people who need different things with the same decision. So what's a real conversation? So this is a version that I think actually matters. And it's not when do we move, and it's not where do we move, because those are logistical. Those things can be figured out in the afternoon, with the right information, the right movers, you've got contacts for all that situation. The real conversation is what does the next chapter need to feel like for each of them to feel like it was the right choice? And that question sounds simple, but it's really not. And I just had a conversation with a person over the phone about this the other day. They were living up north from here. Because the answer is going to require you to think and be honest in a generally hard way. You got to be honest about what you need, but you also have to be reasonable about what your needs are. The version of the conversation where one person says, I need to feel like I'm not leaving something behind. I need to feel like I'm moving towards something. And the other person says, well, I need to feel like I still have a place that's mine and not just kind of disappear into your version of the house. And those aren't necessarily opposing needs, but they're they can be compatible, but if they're you got to name them and you got to put it out there. And so many couples will not name them because everybody that's been living for a long time, for like decades in a house, it's hard for them to transition out because they've got their space, they've got their time, they've got everything already there. And they're negotiating logistics instead of needs. Logistics are no big deal. And when they wonder why, it's like every conversation they have just ends in this like tension and frustration. But then you have one of them that's still looking at the listings and trying to find something. Well, what about this? What about this one? So here's what I'd encourage you to do. And I mean this pretty much like as a practical thing, not just a philosophical one. Before you look at another listing, before you have another conversation about timing or square footage or which neighborhood, sit down together. It doesn't have to be at a table, kitchen table, but sit somewhere quiet and get a pen and paper out and ask each other a couple of questions. Make this feel like the right move for you. And what are you most afraid of losing? And those questions, I'll give you my example. When I moved from Dallas to Flower Mound, what was I afraid of losing? Well, you know what? I had a lot of restaurants that I like to do. I'm a foodie. I had the convenience of not having to go more than 5 or 10 minutes to get anywhere. What I realized when I moved to Flower Mound was the situation was pretty much the same, but the roads are better up here. The traffic is a lot less. The grocery stores aren't crazy packed in Flower Mound where I can find parking nearby. I'm not fighting for a space or even circling around. Once I got here, instead of thinking about what I was losing, I reframed that as to what am I going to be gaining? So you don't really solve anything in the conversation. You don't really negotiate. You're just listening, and you might be surprised at what you hear from each other, what your needs are. And I felt like for me, that was something I'd become comfortable being in the place that I was. I want to speak for a moment to the person in the relationship who's not quite ready yet. That would be me, because I think I often felt unseen in this conversation. And if that's you, your partner is probably more ready than you are. And every conversation about this feel a little bit like you're being pushed, or the hesitation is an obstacle. It used to cause us a lot of tension. I'll be honest with you. I got sick of talking about Zillow and Redfin and whatever other website she was looking at. And it's not that your hesitation, it's not a problem to be solved. It's information. It's telling you something important about what you value. I valued those things I mentioned and about what you need. And I felt like I still needed the same thing. But I didn't have the space in my previous living condition that I do now. So I've actually been able to thrive a lot more where I am now. And you also, and this was me also, what was I afraid of? What was it going to cost me in terms of the person that I was before and the person that I am now? A good partner and a good process can make that space for you. And we'll take it seriously. But here's the thing that I also want to sit with kind of gently. There's a difference between hesitation that's protecting you and a hesitation that's just like keeping you in your place. And the hesitation that's protecting you is like, I need more information. I need to see the house. I need to look at the neighborhood. I need more clarity. I need to know what my needs are, that my needs are being considered. The hesitation that's keeping you in your place is, I'm afraid staying here is the only thing that feels familiar. And both of these things, I have to tell you, they're both worth examining, but only one of those reasons is a reason to wait. You don't have to be certain. You don't have to be excited. You just have to be honest with yourself and your partner about what your hesitation, what are you actually holding? And the honesty is where the conversation starts, quite frankly. Now, to the person who's ready. So I was the other person, right, that I just described. So the person that's ready, which would have been my wife. And now, if you look at the other side of the table, to that person, they've known for a while, she knew for a while, that maybe it's time. And where we were living was too small, but maybe where you're living, the house is too big. So what's the next chapter waiting? Every year that passes is a year that you're not living the life that you've been working toward. I wasted 2 years as a result of doing this. First, certainly is valid. You're ready. Your readiness is not impatience. You've got some clarity. The clarity, you've earned that clarity because you've been doing a lot of homework, but you want to hold it carefully, because the person that's across the table from you or sitting across from you isn't moving slowly to necessarily frustrate you. I wasn't trying to frustrate the situation. They're moving slowly because this is real to them, because of the weight of it that's being left behind is real. And the most common mistake I kind of see in this dynamic, and I say this pretty much with a lot of empathy and compassion, is the person who's ready, starting the process like a project to be managed, finding listings, figuring out how it's going to get paid for, basically driving the conversation, pushing you with a little bit of energy and optimism. And that makes the other person, which would be me, feel more like a passenger than a partner. So wasn't feeling super equal on that. And if that's you, and if you've been in that project mode, I would recommend that you slow down. Not abandon your readiness, but to bring the person that you care about along with you instead of you being ahead of them. I mean, the goal is not to move. The goal is to move together. And the distinction matters enormously, and I see this over and over again. When you're building a life in a new place, because the energy that you're bringing, you're the one driving the bus on this deal, is the beginning of the chapter, a new chapter. Together, you can be aligned, and I mean genuinely in it together, and that energy will shape everything that comes afterwards. It'll make the logistical move easier. It'll make the transition a lot easier, and you'll be able to get comfortable in your new home and your new chapter faster. The 90 days that I described in a previous video, take a look at that. I mean, they look entirely different when people arrive together today. It's worth the extra time to get there. So what actually happens? What I've watched happen over and over again, and I've seen couples have this conversation, and a real one, not with me in the room necessarily, but something kind of shifts. Not immediately. It's not like the hesitation. Listen, I just had a situation like this happen the other night where we were in a situation of selling a house, and it was a family deal, and I was kind of surprised at the shift, quite frankly, but that's a side note. So something shifts. I mean, it's not immediately. It's not like the hesitation disappears overnight, but there's a change in the quality of the conversation, and it stops. To me, it was always kind of like a negotiation. Then things started changing into a collaboration once we both started getting on the same page. And that's what happens when both people are kind of hearing each other and listening, and they feel like their needs are being met. They're on the table. They're in the room. The decision almost makes itself very easily. And once a decision was made between us, it was very quick to get the ball rolling. And it actually became fun because, I mean, it's no longer a question of why are we doing this or are we doing this? It becomes, how do we do this and make it work in a way for both of us? And that is an entirely different conversation, and it's much easier to have. Now, you also have two couples that are like both, or you'll have couples that both partners are like, they're both in the same direction, and that's great. Then it just gets down to the minuscule stuff of square footage and rooms and stuff like that. But that's a whole different conversation, and actually it's a much easier one to have. And I've watched couples go from years of like quiet stalemate to almost signing a contract within weeks, because not necessarily because the circumstances changed, but because they finally had been having a conversation that they'd been avoiding. And the move didn't get easier, but the decision, it got more certain, and they just stopped negotiating with the surface and started talking about what actually mattered to both of them. And that's what's available to you right now, tonight, even not a new listing, not a new market update, just two people in a quiet room asking each other, their actual need. The houses will always be there. You can find the house that you want in an area that you want. It's just it may take some time, but you got to be on the same page. And if anything has landed in this video for you, if you recognize either side of the table, I'd love to hear about it. I've had this conversation enough time that it almost always leads somewhere good. And there's only been a few times where people just cannot get on the same page and they're still stuck in the same place they were. But that's not always where people expected, but it ended up being somewhere right. And I hope this has helped, and I will see you next time. I'm Chris Hooper, Chris Hooper Realty.